world is right indeed. I missed you dearly, Danny. I don't know how I survived these last 2 minutes. Honestly, it was a heart-rending moment, heart-wrenching moment. You got what I did there, right? Spell with an SCH, just like this guy I know. No comment. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Oh, Tool. Oh. How could I have? I'm slipping.
You are slipping, but it's okay. I'll take it. All right, we've got a Caro-Kann, an advanced Caro with the bishop outside the structure. For those looking for the defining factor here, Black's bishop is not back there on c8 where it's blocked by the closed center. So these positions, Black has solved that huge problem, but White has some chances, a little bit extra time, and sometimes that bishop can even be a target, which is why Black plays h6 to be able to bring it back to h7.
Yeah, and Gukesh's setup is called the short variation. This is probably, not even arguably, this is the topical way to meet the bishop f5 Caro in the last couple of years. And it's a very positional line. So the battle is going to revolve around both sides of the board. Black will often play c5 French style, Danny, and then the knight from e7 moves into c6. It's like a French with the bishop outside the pawn chain. I don't know why anybody would ever play the move 1 e6 again after seeing this position.
Can we just turn this into an infomercial for why you never play the French? Look how happy that bishop is on f5. highlight it for me, Danya.
So
make it green.
Happy.
Make it green, baby, because it's happy. Green is for good. That bishop is happy. It's got a diagonal. It's got a safe square on h7.
Nice little tuck away spot. Yeah.
Who plays the French? Am I right?
You're preaching to the choir here. It's totally beyond me.
Well, all right. Jokes aside, we have a position that Black is striving for c5, as Danya highlighted. You see the queen on b6, the knight on d7. The pieces will coordinate to try to get that play. But White is a teeny bit better, despite Black solving the bishop problems. That's usually because the computer's kind of like the space that White has, and the pawn on e5 giving White a little more luft. But what's the plan here if you're the first player, if you're Gukesh?
I just want to, maybe not exactly answering the question. I think a lot of people are wondering why not c5? What's the hesitation? So if we bring up an analysis board really quickly, and this is part of Gukesh's plan, is to play against c5. What often happens if you play c5 prematurely is that there's a big trade on c5. White can stick a bishop on this really nice outpost, and then follow up with knight d4, and then the bishop slides into e3 and the queen gets in trouble. So with the king side still undeveloped, playing c5 often contains a lot more risk than benefit. And that's why we see Magnus taking a fundamentally different approach. He moves his knight away to g6, and that clears the space for the bishop to come out to e7. But Gukesh shoving his h-pawn right down the board and knocking the knight back to f8 or maybe to h4.
He likes that h-pawn push. We saw him do it,
doesn't he?
In the other game that he had as White in that Rossalimo. So liking that little h. Harry, you're a wizard there, that h-pawn. Knight h4, though, by Magnus, which is a good lesson. I think that when you have less space, if there's a safe way to trade minor pieces, as long as it tactically works, this is usually the preferred approach. And that's a good lesson for any viewers out there looking to learn from Magnus. Putting a knight on f8, not what you want here. You want to get some pieces traded to give you some more squares, and your pieces aren't wrestling each other anymore.
And I always struggle in these positions with White because the eval bar always gives, something between 0.5 and 1.3. Here it's giving an entire point, which is supposedly a big advantage. But how do you follow up? Space advantages don't win games. You actually have to convert it into something tangible. And often that something, Danny, is f4, g4, and f5. But I would be very nervous pushing those kingside pawns against the world champion.
Yeah, especially because once you push them, they can't go back, right? Thanks, Captain Obvious. But pawns don't move backwards, and opening your king will often come back to bite you, especially in fast time controls, right? Even if it's something you would do, Danya, in classical chess, blitz is just a different animal where you know that inevitably, knight d3 is going to allow bishop e4, and g2 is a problem.
And if f3, then bishop takes d3 and knight takes e5 is so easy to miss.
It's a tactic. It's on the board. Will Magnus see it?
Bishop e4, nasty little move.
White can play g3 f3 there, but there would still have been knight f3, bishop d. Okay, so Magnus instead goes c5, wants to start opening up lines.
Pretty surprised, actually, that Magnus didn't go bishop e4.
Yeah, he maybe didn't see the tactic. It's possible.
He goes instead for the mass trade on c5, and now that he's castled kingside, you don't have to worry about bishop b5 or bishop e3. All of those moves are totally innocuous. So I still think Black has solved all of his opening problems here.
Yeah, agreed. And the issue is, as these pieces are traded, I'm feeling more and more like White didn't get enough out of the first stage because the E pawn is a little weak. I guess you can play bishop e3, bishop d4, right? If you can anchor in a bishop, you're not stressed about it. Maybe you do have f4 and g4 still on the agenda. Okay, wow, bishop f4.
And another reason that Caro is such a good opening for blitz is that you often have all of Black's pieces on perfect squares. And you have that here. The bishop is so nice on h7. It's just slicing through the entire board, kind of ruining the coordination between White's pieces. The rooks can come to d8 and c8, and the knight can always swing back to f5 to prepare the d4 pawn break, by the way. Very unpleasant idea. Or it can exert more pressure on g2 with that aforementioned bishop e4 move, which hasn't gone anywhere and is still very much possible.
I was going to say, that's still possible, although g3 now a little more interesting than before, because if bishop e4, g3, that knight might have to go to f5, and is your bishop getting in trouble on e4? So I really like the instructive point you had about Black pushing d4, because I think that's a thematic one for people to understand about the structure, because you don't really want White putting a piece on d4, and that's called a wedge in a structure where you replace the middle pawn with a piece. If Black can get a rook on d8 and play d4, usually the tactics and the space that is opening up there will be preferred by Black.
Yeah, and as one Robert Hess would point out, as bishop e4 is in fact on the board, Black holds the main pawn break, and Black has a second pawn break in f7, f6, which you do see in the French often.
Yeah.
And it can also get very unpleasant. Look at White's kingside pawns. They're both weak. And again, it's the Magnus effect. You just don't want to play a move like g3 against Carlsen. So that's going to be additional time. Gukesh goes g4.
G4?
He slaps in my face. He says, hey, I don't want to play g3. I want to push it one square further.
G4, here we go.
Damn,
this
girl.
Is, not quite G5 and we live. Not quite G5 and we live for Canty, but damn girl, G4. By the way, I know the eval bar said, yeah, that's okay for Black, but I kind of like the spirit. I like King H2 coming next to unpin the F pawn. Maybe I can play bishop E3 and F4. Go back to the idea you said. There's also bishop G3 as a threat in this exact position. Where's that knight going, Danya?
Yeah, that's the twist. We thought the bishop was going to get in trouble. Now the knight's in some trouble, but F5 by Magnus, he just says, hey, I'm meeting you at the top. And very important, bishop G3 here, the queen can drop back to E7, defending the knight. And it can also adopt an attacking posture later from G5. I don't like the direction. I admire Gukesh's bravery to play G4, but I feel like in the context of a blitz game, Danny, he's got way too many weaknesses on the king side.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And again, it is a little bit of the Magnus biased itis, right? He's playing the world champ and we know what he does. The position is very tactical and unclear in some ways, but every second that ticks off the clock, the harder it becomes to play positions where your king is open. You are more likely to blunder. This is a fact. And so it's why we were nervous about these ideas, despite the initial applause to G4 and let's go. We saw Anita in chat, but I'm very nervous about White's position.
Yeah, me too. Bishop to E3. So Gukesh knocks the queen out of C5 and paves the way for either F3 or F4, depending on where Magnus puts his queen. F3 does technically trap the bishop, by the way. So,
but there's going to be
G4.
What is going? And by the way, the computer loved it. He goes full Braunstein, baby. It's a clearance sacrifice.
At these pieces, and Bishop H1 is an idea that light squares are just massive holes. And if F3 here, then Magnus will play F takes G4, using the knight and the queen to generate an unstoppable mate threat on G2. This is amazing.
Dude, D4. Can we bring up the analysis board to provide a little bit of instruction on that move, D4? Because I'm also wondering whether Gukesh should have bailed and taken with the queen, Danya. Could he get into the endgame? He should have, right? Because you're going to get mated otherwise.
But the thing is, here Magnus could have dropped his queen back to C6 with the same types of threats. So apparently the move was bishop takes D4, queen c6, and now f4 with the idea of meeting bishop h1 with rook f2. How do you miss that with 30 seconds? Such an easy idea. Very natural recapturous. But okay, there's moves happening. Gukesh played rook c1. No, but this is total. I mean, look at the light squares on the king side. Ugh.
Oh my gosh, this is
bishop g2 and queen f3 is coming.
Opposite colored bishops are invading, a lot like your in-laws over the holiday season. You didn't invite them. They show up. They're dominating the holiday season. You're like, how'd you get here? I'm sorry, in-law reference. I blacked out a little bit.
Danny,
look at this.
Queen d8.
Queen is coming to h4. It's over.
Look at that maneuver. Oh, he missed it. It was mate.
It was mate. Black. This shows you how dominant the opposite bishops are. But Magnus has now missed forced mate in a couple games. So despite him leading the match.
Crazy. Queen d8 is just basic Betty right there. But
look
he's
at this.
Winning.
Look at this.
Still winning.
The light square problems remain. Your in-laws haven't left yet. This is the problem when you have an attack to defend on one color square and your dark square bishop is like a big pawn there on e3. Let's highlight it in red. Look at that big pawn on e3 doing nothing.
Man.
Here
that
comes
pawn
Magnus.
On e3, and you won't have any more pawns left after Magnus finishes taking all of them. Gukesh is going to flag on top of everything else. 1 second, and Magnus is going to promote his pawn. H3.
H-pawn. H-pawn.
H2.
Yo, wizard, Harry. Yo, wizard.
Danny, why can't I do that? I'm missing mate in like 3 and still win.